Hello, good morning everyone. In the previous class we were talking about Mauryas, the first political unification of entire India. Sorry. Am I audible in the back? Am I audible in the back? Yeah. So any doubts, any questions if you have from the last class, please go ahead. Anyone? Whatever we have discussed till now. Yes. What about rock edicts? सब कुछ clear है? Please be louder. Sorry? Guys, please keep quiet. Ajivika. Ajivika was a philosophy very similar to how Buddhism and Jainism developed as a philosophy. So Ajivika was in also a reaction against the prevailing practices. जो पूरा I told you in the post-Vedic age that ये जो पूरा Brahminical supremacy and how Brahmins use their position often to basically assert their authority on all the other sections of society. And many people did not like it. In fact, many of them were Kshatriyas also. So we discussed that a reaction emerged against that in various forms. So for example, one of the form was Buddhism, which of course was very popular. Even today it is very popular. Jainism again was another form. One was Charvaka and one was Ajivika. So Ajivika was a philosophy, and the Ajivika jo followers hai, they had a different idea about life, about world in general. So for example, the most prominent idea of Ajivika is that everything is already determined. Everything is already determined. जो हम बोलते हैं ना नियति बोलते हैं. एक जैसे for example अगर आप हिंदू philosophy भी पढ़ोगे तो दो चीजें आती हैं. एक होता है नियति, एक होता है कर्मा. So niyati basically means that everything is pre-decided. Karma basically means that पूरा जो गीता का idea है that कर्मण्येवाधिकारस्ते, right? So आप जो है जो करोगे उसके हिसाब से आपको फल मिलेगा. They both are contradictory to each other. While niyati tells you that everything is predetermined, karma tells you that it is not so. You have free will. Depending upon what you do, you are going to get results, right? तो ये दो अलग-अलग theories हैं. जो आजीविका है that followed theory of niyati, that everything is predetermined, entire world is fatalistic, we have no free will. That is the primary theme of Ajivika. और भी बहुत सारे details होंगे, but for examination perspective, I think that should be sufficient. So I was talking about Ajivika in the last class because Bindusar followed Ajivika philosophy. Any other question? Anyways, we are talking about Mauryan administration. So I told you that we have three sources here, three major sources. We have Arthashastra, we have Megasthenes Indica, we have Ashokan inscriptions. We can combine all of them together and we can discuss the details of administration. But our primary source will be Arthashastra. But there is one problem, as I told you in the previous class itself. Arthashastra is a theoretical framework. It is not a descriptive work. So had Chanakya written his own biography, or had he written about his own experiences, things would have been very simpler for historians to reconstruct the history of Maurya. But because it is a theoretical work, how much of Arthashastra was exactly implemented, that will be a very difficult question to answer. So we will have to use some other sources like Ashokan inscriptions or Megasthenes Indica. But nonetheless, Arthashastra still is very, very important. It will give you a rough idea about how administration was organized. So जो सबसे primary idea है अर्थशास्त्र का, that entire state जो है, entire state अर्थशास्त्र by the way is the first text in India which defines state, what a state comprises of. So state Arthashastra talks about that one state has 7 organs, 7 related organs. Without one organ, state is not going to function properly. So we are going to elaborate, we are going to discuss these 7 organs. So few basic things, it should be very clear. For example, Magad was a monarchy, we already have discussed it. Monarchy में एक जो important aspect क्या होगा? That king will have the absolute authority. So king will be at the helm of all power. Everyone else will be below king. So that is true for Magad also. Magad, especially Ashoka, they followed what we call paternal despotism. Paternal despotism basically means that where a king considers his subjects as his own children. So जो प्रजा का ख्याल रखने वाली बात करते हैं कि we have to take care of our subject, very similar to how we take care of our sons and daughters. So paternal despotism is prominent, and especially during time of Ashoka, because Ashoka, in fact, in some inscriptions, says that all men and women are my children, right? So we are going to elaborate upon these 7 organs, right? So just write down few things here. Give the heading more in administration. Write down few things here in bullet points. Arthashastra is first Indian text to define a state. Arthashastra is a first Indian text to define a state. To define a state. It considers state consisting of 7 interlocked elements. It considers state consisting of 7 interlocked elements. 7 interlocked elements. अब ब्रैकेट में लिख लेना, ये जो एलिमेंट्स हैं अर्थशास्त्र यूजेस प्रकृति और अंग. अंग बेसिकली मीन्स एन ऑर्गन. अंग और प्रकृति. Seven interlocked elements known as Saptang Rajya. Known as Saptang Rajya. Saptang, 7 organs. Known as Saptang Rajya. So what are those Saptang Rajya? You have Swami. So Swami basically is king, जो promulgator of social order है. The helm of all the power is Swami. Then you have Amatya. Now, Amatya basically means all the ministers, all the bureaucrats, all the important functionaries. Together they are called Amatya. You have Janpad. Now the meaning of Janpad literally means territory, but in this case Janpad along with territory it also means people. So the territory and the people who are occupying this territory together, they are part of Janpad, a very very important organ. Then you have Durg. Now Durg basically means fort, right? But दुर्ग का जो लिटरल मीनिंग होगा वो फोर्ट है, बट दिस फोर्टिफिकेशन इज फॉर कैपिटल, बिकॉज कैपिटल इज द सेंटर ऑफ पावर फॉर द किंग. So we have to take special care. For example, in this case Patliputra, we have to take special care that capital is protected, because as long as capital is protected, even if king has some minor setbacks or some setbacks in the peripheral areas, as long as the core area is protected, king can always restore his power later. So you need to take special care to ensure that capital is properly protected. So that is Durg. You have Kosh. Now Kosh basically means treasury. So treasury basically means that without finance, without capital, without money, king cannot do anything. So special investment on tax collection to reduce corruption in tax collection, all of those things are very, very important. Next component is Dand. But it should be very clear. Dand, if you look at the literal translation of dand, it means punishment, right? But here it is not punishment, it is more about justice. So justice or force can be a very good translation of dand here. So the focus is that if somebody is doing a crime, they should be dealt with all the might of state. So the focus is not as such, punishment is not the focus. The focus is to ensuring that there is justice in the society. So you can use the word justice or force. And last but not the least is mitra. Now mitra basically means ally. कि आपके जो भी allied power हैं, allied power हैं, what type of relationship you need to maintain with your neighbors, with your neighboring countries. So that actually was dependent upon how powerful they are. And Arthashastra talks about as many as 6 types of policies. We will talk about that. So let's discuss all of these things one by one. Let's start with Swami itself. Give this heading, Swami. You can make this diagram, or if you want to write down in bullet points, you can write down in bullet points at one point. So give this heading, Swami. Swami basically is king. Few things. So for example, Arthashastra does know that king's life is very difficult. King, even though he is the most powerful person, but at the same time he has the most responsibilities. So he needs to take special care of knowing about people. People's opinion matters the most for king. It is king's moral duty that all of his citizens are doing well. ये बहुत important focus है अर्थशास्त्र का कि king का बिल्कुल धर्म है. It is in fact his moral duty to take care of his people, right? But at the same time, there is always someone who is attempting to kill king. And because of that, king has to take special care. For example, during night, he has to keep changing his bed so that any type of assassination attempt can be foiled. King also, his entire time period is divided. In fact, as per Arthashastra, king has to work at least 14 to 16 hours. Lagatar. So Arthashastra in fact also mentions that because this is perhaps in fact humanly impossible that कोई 14-16 घंटे लगातार काम कर रहा हो, तो ऐसा कर सकते हैं कि बीच में एक आप नींद ले लो, दिन में सो जाओ थोड़ी देर, रात में सो जाओ. So it divides the entire time period of king into certain categories. That इस time पे ये करना है, इस time पे ये करना है. Also king का जो food होगा, that will always be tested. Because someone is again trying to poison the food, king has to maintain a bodyguard, preferably to be female bodyguard, and that is very interesting because not only Arthashastra tells us, but Megasthenes also writes the same thing, that king maintained a female bodyguard for his personal protection, right? King also employed spies across the kingdom to know about how local rulers are doing, if they are plotting against the king. So different type of spy network. Some of these spies which are permanently stationed at one place, some of the spies which roam around the kingdom, and they tell king about people's opinion as well as the plots of local rulers. So all of this investment is very, very important to ensure that king is well protected. So just write down few things here. King was promulgator of social order, promulgator of social order, promulgator of social order, and was assisted by a council of minister, council of minister, he took all final decisions. He took all final decisions regarding law and order, revenue, war, etc. He took all final decisions regarding law and order, revenue, war, etc. Write down in next bullet point. King had to exercise great vigilance. King had to exercise great vigilance to safeguard his life and position. To safeguard his life and position. Various type of spies. Various type of spies such as संस्था, ब्रैकेट में आप लिख लेना स्टेशनरी स्पाइस, स्टेशनरी स्पाइस एंड संचार, संस्था एंड संचार. Sanchar are basically spies which wandered from one place to another place. So spies who wandered from one place to another. Various type of spies such as Sanstha and Sanchar collected intelligence, collected intelligence, collected intelligence and reported the same to king. Reported the same to king. Special reporters, write down the next bullet point. Special reporters. Special reporters called Pativedak and Polisani, called Pativedak and Polisani, Pativedak and Polisani kept him informed of public opinion. Kept him informed of public opinion. Kept him informed of public opinion. तो ये जो टर्म बेस्ड क्वेश्चंस हैं इनका मीनिंग बस एक एक लाइन में क्लियर होना चाहिए. संस्था एंड संचार, these are spies. Pativedak Polisini, they are type of reporters whose job is to collect information, what people think about the king and inform the king of the same. King maintained, एक लास्ट पॉइंट लिख लेना यहाँ पे. King maintained a body of female bodyguards. King maintained a body of female bodyguards for protection. For protection. Second is Amatya. So Amatya basically means all the higher functionaries. जितने भी ministers हैं, जितने भी higher bureaucrats हैं, all of them collectively are known as Amatya. So Amatya में भी जो सबसे top के Amatya होंगे, they will be मंत्री, पुरोहित, Yuraj. Yuraj basically is prince because prince needs to be trained before becoming king. So all of these are the highest functionaries. Apart from that, there are many other bureaucrats who are collectively known as Amatya. Sorry? Maybe perhaps male bodyguards cannot be trusted. That is the best explanation for me. And I made that as a joke in the last class, but I am serious right now. So maybe because male bodyguards cannot be trusted. Maybe. That was perhaps the reason. Amatya means, write down, it means all high officials all high officials such as minister, minister is mantri, minister, high priest, which is purohit, high priest, purohit, prince, comma, prince, which is Yuvraj, and commander in chief, who is Senapati. Write down the next bullet point. Important officials who were in charge of important portfolios were also known as Mahamatas and Adhyaksh. Were also known as Mahamatas and Adhyaksh. Mahamatas and Adhyaksh. And last bullet point, last two bullet points, write down. Samharthi was chief collector of revenue. Samharthi was chief collector of revenue. And Samharthi was chief collector of revenue, and Samnidhatri was chief treasurer. Samharthi, Samharti. Samnidhatri, Samnidhatri. SAMN है वो, NI. Samnidhatri was chief treasurer. Samnidhatri was chief treasurer. एंड एक लास्ट लाइन लिख लेना इसमें. प्रदेशिका, राजुका एंड युक्ता, वी टॉक्ड अबाउट देम जब हम लास्ट क्लास में अशोक का इंस्क्रिप्शन पढ़ रहे थे. प्रदेशिका, राजुका एंड युक्ता. प्रदेशिका, राजुका and Yukta were important functionaries at district level. Pradeshika, Rajuka and Yukta were important functionaries at district level. At district level. So king has to be assisted by council of minister. Even though he has the absolute authority, he has to be assisted by council of minister. Now third important organ is Janpad. Okay, so Janpad, if I'm talking about Janpad, I'm talking about the entire territorial extent of empire. So apart from Patliputra, which is the capital, the Mauryan territory here, that was divided into 4 major provinces. The first major province was called Uttarpad. Uttarpad basically means northern territories. Then you had Dakshinpad, which basically meant Dakshin territories. Then apart from that, a very important territory was Kaling after victory of Kaling. तो उसका जो पूरा eastern part of जो territory है, that capital was Tosali, which is modern day Dholi in Odisha. and then again you had western part जिसका जो capital था वो उज्जैन था. So 4 major reasons. Takshila was capital of Uttarpat. Suvarnagiri, which right now is in Karnataka, that is capital of Dakshinpat. जो eastern provinces है, the capital was Tosali, which modern day Dholi is, and Western territory, the capital was Ujjaini, which modern day Ujjaini. So that does tell you about the extent of Mauryan administration. As far as Takshila, Suvarnagiri, Eastern India, that includes entire Odisha, Bengal, as well as entire region of Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, ये जो पूरा part है, that was part of Mauryan territory. So just write it down. The empire was divided into 4 provinces. The empire was divided into 4 provinces. 4 provinces apart from capital Patliputra. Apart from capital Patliputra. Patliputra. Northern province with capital at Takshila. Northern province with capital at Takshila. Southern province with capital at Suvarnagiri. Suvarnagiri right now will lie in Karnataka. Takshila will be in Pakistan. In fact, the name Suvarnagiri signifies that it was a prosperous region. Gold, Suvarn basically means gold. So maybe there were gold mines which now have been perhaps depleted, but there is a theory that maybe there were gold mines in this region and hence the name Suvarnagiri. Western province, the capital was Ujjaini. Ujjaini is what modern day Ujjain is. And eastern province with capital at Tosali, which is right now in Odisha. Write down in next bullet point. Different type of headquarters were maintained. Different types of headquarters were maintained. Different types of headquarters were maintained, such as now this is very interesting. एक जो बहुत famous theory है regarding Mauryas, that it was a centralized administration. Even though many historians do not agree with that. The reason it is called centralized administration because empire and centralization go hand in hand. You cannot have a larger empire without centralization. Because centralization अगर नहीं होगा, empire is going to be divided. There is a very good chance that there will be rebellions in the peripheral areas. Local rulers are going to assert their independence. Why do we have to pay taxes every year when we are doing all the work? That feeling will become strengthened with the course of time, and that will lead to rebellion, and that can also lead to independence of certain regions. So the theory was that it was a centralized administration. Even today, many historians believe that to be true, but many historians do not accept this theory because जो कोर एरिया है, जो पाटलिपुत्रा, जो नदन टेरिटरी है, वहां पे कंट्रोल ऑफ कोर्स ज्यादा होगा, बट जो पेरिफेरल एरियाज हैं, जो बॉर्डर एरियाज हैं, वहां पे सेम लेवल ऑफ कंट्रोल मेंटेन करना बहुत मुश्किल है. ऑल्सो if you look at Ashokan inscriptions, even though they are more or less their message is same, but the content varies. So what it means is that whenever bureaucrats were given responsibility for inscribing these edicts, they were given some autonomy. So there are many ideas that how in border areas the control was not as much as it was in the main core area, which is the region around Patliputra. But one of the theory which basically strengthens this idea that it was a centralized administration, that Arthashastra talks about that you need to maintain headquarters at decentralized level. So for example, एक headquarter आपका 800 villages, around 800 villages के around आपको एक headquarter maintain करना है, which is called Asthaniya. Similarly, 400 villages ke around you have to maintain a headquarter, and you have to do that throughout the country. That select few villages, hundreds of villages, and all those hundreds of villages will be maintained by one headquarter, and headquarter के जो फिर bureaucrats होंगे, they will be directly paid by umpire. So this in fact is one of the evidence of a centralized administration. So just write down few things here. Different type of headquarters were maintained, such as asthaniye, such as asthaniye. इसमें बस एक लाइन लिख लेना, asthaniye, to administer about 800 villages, to administer about 800 villages. अब ये जो अस्थानीय के नीचे जो होगा, that will be द्रोणमुख, to administer about 400 villages. So द्रोणमुख will be under asthaniye. Then you have करवातिका, इसमें बस लिख लेना at the level of 200 villages, at the level of 200 villages. And Samgrahan at the level of 10 villages, at the level of 10 villages. At the level of 10 villages. And एक last point इसमें लिख लेना, at the village level, at the village level, Gramika, Gramika, Gramika is village headman, and Gram Vridha, Gram Vridha, Vridha basically means elderly, so आप लिख सकते हो elderly of villages. Elderly of villages, Gram Vridha, played an important role in administration, played an important role in administration. Played an important role in administration. तो ये तो हो गया प्रोविंशियल लेवल का. But जो municipal administration of Patliputra है, we have not talked about Patliputra till now. So this was the administrative unit at provincial level. 4 major provinces, and within these 4 major provinces, you have different headquarters at the level of villages, right? So all these different names. I do not think you need to remember at what level, what is the name. Just understanding of that, ये जो terms हैं, they are associated with units of village administration, or in general units of administration. That should be more than sufficient for prelims examination. You do not have to go and mug it up that कितने level पे क्या नाम है. इस level का हमको ये I have just mentioned it here just to have a more clarity. Wherever information is available, I will provide the information in detail. But if I have to remember the same thing for prelims examination, I will just remember the terms and the significance of these terms. That's it. We do not have to go into details of each and every term in this case. Write down the next bullet point. The municipal administration of Patliputra, the municipal administration of Patliputra was unique was unique. The city administration was conducted by 6 committees, was conducted by 6 committees. Each committee had 5 members. Each committee had 5 members. Each committees had 5 members. These committees were Committee on Industry, comma, foreigners, next, birth and death registration, next, trade, commerce and market regulations, trade, commerce and market regulation, next, manufactured articles, and last, tax collection. अब इसमें एक बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग अगर आप देखो, 2 things, birth and death registration thousands of years ago, that is very very important. Like how many people, population जो है उसको ट्रैक करना, that was a very very important part even thousands of years ago. Second thing, there is a committee regarding foreigners also. So it basically served 2 purpose. First, foreigners का welfare बहुत important है. So the committee primary responsibility was to take care of the welfare of foreigners. Foreigners were treated as guests. They have come as guests. But at the same time, this committee also has the responsibility to know what is their true purpose. Have they come here to spy? So apart from welfare, it was also basically to check their activity. And it goes along with all the precaution Earth Shastra basically talks about, that we have to take utmost precaution so that the position of king is maintained. The next ang is Durg. Durg basically means fortified capital. So fortification basically means all type of protection. जो पूरा आर्मी से लेके जो भी फोर्ट है सब, everything will be part of fortified capital. Write down here in bullet points. Mauryas maintained a large standing army. Mauryas maintained a large standing army. A large standing army which was recruited from all Varnas. Which was recruited from all Varnas. All Varnas. अब यहाँ पे एक डिफरेंस है बिटवीन अर्थशास्त्र एंड इंडिका. While अर्थशास्त्र talks about 4 branches of army, Indica talks about 6 branches of army. Write down both of them. The 4 divisions of army. The 4 divisions of army was where the 4 divisions of army were infantry, cavalry, chariots and elephants. infantry, cavalry, chariots and elephants. They were placed under officers known as Patyadhyaksh, Patadhyaksh. So Patadhyaksh was responsible for infantry. Ashwadhyaksh, So Ashwadhyaksh, as the name suggests, responsible for horses, cavalry. Rathdhyaksh, chariots. And Hastyadhyaksh. Hastyadhyaksh, respectively. They were placed under Patadhyaksh, Ashwadhyaksh, Rathdhyaksh, Hastyadhyaksh, respectively. Write down next bullet point. Megasthenes mentions 6 boards. Megasthenes mentions 6 boards which looked after 6 boards which looked after Megasthenes mentions 6 boards. So ये जो 4 हैं, 4 division, that is part of Arthashastra. But Megasthenes mentions 6 boards which looked after different branches of army. तो ये 4 तो सेम है, but a very interesting mention by Megasthenes is that there was a board of admiralty. Basically admiralty जो board है, that was to take care of navy. Arthashastra does not talk about navy anywhere, that you have to maintain a naval force. But Megasthenes mentions that जो Mauryas है, they maintained a naval force. So write down board of admiralty. इसमें ब्रैकेट में लिख लेना, in charge of naval force, in charge of navy. बाकी 4 सेम है, infantry, cavalry, chariots, elephants. board of infantry, board of cavalry. आप बस बोर्ड लिखने की जरूरत नहीं है, जस्ट मेंशन इन्फैंट्री, कैवेलरी, चैरियट्स, एलिफेंट्स. इन्फैंट्री, कैवेलरी, chariots, elephants. But there is another very important board which is very important for army, that a board for transport and supervision of equipment. कि जो भी army equipment use करती है, it needs to be supervised on a regular basis. So write down the board for transport and supervision of equipment. Transport and supervision of So here we have to assume that some sort of navy was definitely maintained by Mauryans, because Arthashastra, I told you, Arthashastra is a theoretical framework, while Megasthenes is observing about administration of Patliputra and writing about it. So we have to assume that maybe not as powerful as what later rulers maintained, because it is not a coastal state. Patliputra is not a coastal in the sense ocean के पास में नहीं है, rivers चारों तरफ हैं, and that is why perhaps maintaining some sort of naval army is very, very important. Some sort of navy is important. So maybe it was not very powerful, but it was maintained. That is what we can assume. Mahamatas and Mahamatras are same thing. That is a question by Niyati. Mahamatas and Mahamatras are same thing. So apart from all the standing army, Arthashastra also mentions that if need is required, we need to recruit army on a temporary basis. अब ये कौन से होंगे? जैसे आर्मी में एक बहुत मेजर कंपोनेंट होता है मर्सिनरीज का. You guys know about the mercenary? Mercenary are those people who will fight for anyone जो सबसे ज़्यादा पे कर रहा है. कि आपने एक कॉन्ट्रैक्ट करे, they will fight for you. So even Arthashastra talks about mercenaries. Arthashastra also talks about you have to, if you need support from your mitra, from your ally, take their support, and you can also recruit forest people. जो tribes हैं, tribes maintain a cordial relationship with tribes and include them also in your army. So just take last point लिख लेना. There is a mention of periodic levies of troops. There is a mention of periodic levies of troops such as Mawla. Mawla are hereditary warriors. Hereditary warriors, comma, Bhartikas या Bhartiyakas, Bhartiyakas are mercenaries. Bhartiyakas are forest tribe soldiers, and allies. Forest tribe soldiers and allies. So allies are basically जो भी friendly nations हैं, they also are going to supply troops if there is a need. Now fifth element of Saptang, that is perhaps the most important one, which is कोष और treasury. ये आपके एग्जाम के लिए भी बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है. What type of taxation, various types of taxes, जो पूरा इकोनॉमिक एस्पेक्ट ऑफ एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन है, दैट इज फिफ्थ था ना, दिस विल बी फिफ्थ. कोष, which is treasury. Without any doubt, land revenue will be the major source of income. We are talking about ancient medieval India. In ancient medieval India, land revenue जो होगा major source of income होगा. Apart from that, of course, because Patliputra in itself is a great city along with many other cities which emerged at this point of time. So a lot of manufacturing activity was going on, lot of trade was going on, trade which was inland trade as well as trade with foreign nations. So custom duty, taxes on different type of professions. So lots of professions are mentioned. Apart from agriculture, many other professions are mentioned, and all those professions, they had to pay certain taxes. So land revenue is the major source of revenue, but apart from that, there are many other sources of revenue for state. So just write down few things here. Land revenue was the major source of revenue. Land revenue was major source of revenue. Peasants had to pay 1/6 of produce as bhag. 1/6 of produce as bhag, and an extra tax called bali as tribute. Extra tax called bali as tribute. अब जैसे ये क्लियर जो इंफॉर्मेशन है हमको कैसे पता चलता है, बिकॉज अशोका विजिटेड लुम्बिनी एंड जो पूरा विलेज है, ही बेसिकली इन वन ऑफ द इंस्क्रिप्शंस विच इज वेरी फेमसली नोन एज रुम्बिनी दे इंस्क्रिप्शन, ये मैंने जो हैंड आउट दे रखा है वहां पे लिखा होगा, बहुत, दिस इज अ वेरी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट इंस्क्रिप्शन, रुम्बिनी दे इंस्क्रिप्शन. In Rumini, the inscription mentions that Lumbini has been freed of Bali, that there will be no tribute, and the tax, जो भाग है, that has been reduced from 1/6 to 1/8. So the tax was also reduced. If, let's say, for example, if the mention is that Lumbini was given tax-free status, that will also be not a incorrect statement. That at least one tax was completely done away with, which is Bali. Write down next bullet point. Arthashastra recognizes state-owned land as well as private-owned land. Arthashastra recognizes state-owned land as well as private-owned land. Now this is very similar to even today. Government has lot of land. Government के पास बहुत सारा land है. वैसे ही individuals के पास बहुत सारा land है. अब this is very important because Megasthenes mentioned that all land belongs to state. But Megasthenes, many historians believe that he was not a very good observer of lot of things. He may have thought that just because state is collecting tax, it means that all the land belongs to state. But Arthashastra as well as some other text mention that जो private property है, that privately owned जो land है, that was a very popular idea at this point of time. So private property as a land, this was popular during Mauryan administration. Write down next bullet point. Owner of the field Kshetrika, owner of the field Kshetrika was distinguished from the tenant who was called Upavasa. From the tenant who was called Upavasa. I have mailed the handout, it will be uploaded today. और मैंने आपको कल ही मेल करा था मैंने, तो जो अशोकन इंस्क्रिप्शन का हैंडआउट है, आई एम वेरी श्योर इट विल बी रिफ्लेक्टेड either in today's lecture or last lecture. Even today you have Batai system. I hope you guys know about Batai system. कि land belongs to someone and then you have given this land to a person जो पूरी responsibility खेती का उसके पास होगा. You have to basically divide that produce. In many cases half. Half of the produce will go to the landowner and half of the produce will go to the tenant. So this idea is as old as Mauryan administration. That land का एक owner होगा and as well as land का एक tenant होगा, right? Write down next bullet point. Peasants had to pay many other taxes. Peasants had to pay many other taxes such as Pindkar, so Pindkar was assessed on a group of villages. आप ब्रैकेट में लिख सकते हो. Assessed on a group of villages. Assessed on a group of villages. Hiranya only paid in cash. Hiranya was a tax which you only can pay in cash. Generally tax pay करने का थोड़ा बहुत flexibility था, that you can pay in both cash or kind. Can anyone explain what kind is? Anything, crop. For example, whatever your produce is, you are sharing that produce. आप एक part of produce जो है directly share कर रहे हो rather than paying cash. So there was a flexibility that you can pay your tax in both cash or kind, but Hiranya, in case of Hiranya, exactly what it was for, that will be a very difficult thing to answer. But Hiranya was a tax which was only paid in cash. And Kar, simply Kar, which was levied on fruits and vegetables. Write down. Levied on fruits and vegetables. Fruits and vegetables. अर्थशास्त्र में हमने डिस्कस किया था कि मौर्य वर्ड कहीं पे मेंशन नहीं है. जो मौर्य वर्ड है या पाटलिपुत्र है, चंद्रगुप्त है, कहीं पे मेंशन नहीं है. बट अर्थशास्त्र वी डू नो दैट इट वाज कंपाइल्ड जस्ट बिफोर चंद्रगुप्त कमिंग टू पावर. दैट इज द मोस्ट एक्सेप्टेड थ्योरी. तो हम एज्यूम करेंगे कि जो अर्थशास्त्र के आइडियाज हैं दे वर इंप्लीमेंटेड बिकॉज चाणक्य वाज द मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट मिनिस्टर इन द कोर्ट ऑफ चंद्रगुप्त मौर्य. So we have to assume that he played a very, very important role in administrative setup, and he already had all these ideas. तो इसको implement करना फिर ज़्यादा better भी होगा, right? Write down next bullet point. An emergency tax called Pranay. An emergency tax called Pranay was imposed. An emergency tax called Pranay was imposed if the state treasury got depleted. If the state treasury got depleted. And एक point और लिख लेना, we are talking about agriculture till now. Arthashastra also mentions establishing settlements on unoccupied land. Arthashastra also mentions establishing settlements on unoccupied land, which was called Shunya Nivesh. Which was called Shunya Nivesh. This is also very interesting. Shunya Nivesh, you do not have to invest anything. Unoccupied land hai, that unoccupied land will become part of agricultural land, and the king's treasury, king can increase tax. Arthashastra recommends that this investment, this settlement should occur mostly by Shudras. आप लिख सकते हो. It recommends new villages should comprise of 100 to 500 people, 100 to 500 families, 100 to 500 families, mostly Shudras. There is also mention of, it recommends new villages should consist of 100 to 500 families, mostly Shudras. It also mentions, in next bullet point, write down, state extracting Vishti from people. अब ये जो टर्म है बड़ा ही इंपॉर्टेंट टर्म है, विश्ती. इस पे यूपीएससी ने एटलीस्ट 2-3 बार क्वेश्चन पूछा है पिछले 10-15 सालों में. विश्ती, the term Vishti basically means forced labor. That you are doing some work, but you are not getting paid anything. This idea became very popular during Gupta period. So I'm going to talk about Vishti again जब हम Gupta period discuss करेंगे. But the idea is mentioned even in Arthashastra. So in Gupta period the term is used for forced labor. But जो logic of Vishti है that it is a type of tax people have to pay if they cannot pay. अगर आप cash नहीं दे सकते, आप tax नहीं pay कर सकते, then state can force you to do work. And why state is doing that? It is a type of tax you owe it to state. तो आप लिख सकते हो, the term signifies forced labor. The term Vishti signifies forced labor and it was considered a type of tax people had to pay. Type of tax people had to pay. Write down next bullet point. Apart from land revenue, taxes on other activities such as trading, such as trading. Trading here does not mean what modern day trading is. Stock market की हम बात नहीं कर रहे. Trading simply I am talking about import and export. Such as trading, comma, mining and metallurgy, manufacturing, etc. And एक last point लिख लेना. Mauryas used silver coins. Called panna. Mauryas used silver coins called panna, carrying the symbols of peacock. Copper coins were also used. Which were called mashakas. So panna is silver coin. Silver coin was very popular. Gold coin अभी तक नहीं आया है. Remember this, very important thing. Apart from knowing this fact that copper and silver coin are very popular, also remember another fact that gold coin अभी तक कोई भी gold coin, no one is issuing gold coin right now. The first gold coins which were issued, that was by Greek rulers and later by Kushanas, and of course during Gupta period gold coins were issued in the largest number, right? So the first set of gold coins were issued by Greek rulers, not by Mauryans. So this is again very, very important to remember. The officer in charge of coinage was called Roop Darshak. The officer in charge of coinage was called Roop Darshak. The officer in charge of coinage was called Roop Darshak. Coinage. So this was a very, very important organ, type of taxes regarding land, etc. Second last is which basically means justice or force. So without judicial administration, we cannot imagine a kingdom, we cannot imagine an empire. Arthashastra talks about two types of court. One type of court is called Dharmasthya, another type of court is called Kantakshodhan. The exact difference between Dharmasthya and Kantakshodhan is not clear, but some historians believe that maybe Dharmasthya was a civil court and Kantakshodhan was a criminal court. So ये जो civil और criminal classification है, this becomes very clear during Gupta period, जो पूरा civil criminal classification है, but many historians feel that it may be as old as Mauryan duration, Mauryan administration. In today's class, I'm not going to take any break. The reason is I'm going to end the class at 12 because I have to go, sorry, not at 12, at 11 because I have to go somewhere. So that is why I'm not going to take any break. Okay? ठीक है. So thank you. Thank you. Write down in bullet points. Two types of courts existed. Two types of courts existed. Two types of courts existed. Dharmasthya, Dharmasthya and Kantakshodhan. Dharmasthya and Kantakshodhan. आप इसमें लिख सकते हो, the exact difference between the two is not clear. The exact difference between two is not clear. The exact difference between two is not clear. The former may have dealt with civil matters. The former may have dealt with civil matters. And later judicial matters. Later criminal matters. Later criminal matters. The formers may have dealt with civil matters and later with criminal matter. तो ये जो civil और criminal classification है, that may have been the basis. Judges were called dharmastha. Judges were called dharmastha. However, as per Ashokan inscription, write down, as per Ashokan inscription, even Mahamatas were given judicial functions. Even Mahamatas were given judicial function. Even Mahamatas were given judicial function. Next bullet point. Pradeshtri was responsible for suppression of criminals. Pradeshtri was responsible for suppression of criminals. And one more thing, do not need to write it, but जो punishment है, so death penalty was quite common, but apart from that, severe punishment like cutting off an organ, right, or amputation, things like that was quite common at this period of time. So apart from fine or imprisonment or capital punishment, even amputation was quite a common practice. And we do know that this practice of amputation continued even during later kingdoms. So it was maintained by Gupta period also, it was maintained by Harshvardhan also. So this practice continued. However, when Ashoka became ruler, he reduced the severity of punishment. So, but at the same time, for example, capital punishment was not discontinued. This can become confusing because Ashoka followed Buddhism. Then we may think that maybe capital punishment was discontinued, but that is not correct. Also, Ashoka did not disband his army. This is again a very common confusion. that the army was disbanded. So Ashoka did not, Mauryans maintained a very large standing army. Anyways, write down next bullet point. नहीं, Pradeshtri are officers. Sorry, Pradeshtri's जो हैं officers हैं, whose job is basically to suppress criminals. अभी भी जैसे फॉर एग्जाम्पल आप थाने में जाओगे तो एक जेल होगा, एंड देन यू हैव फाइनली व्हेन यू आर कन्विक्टेड यू आर सेंट टू अ जेल, राइट? सो दिस टू आर डिफरेंट थिंग्स. एक तो जो होगा फॉर एग्जाम्पल फॉर अ टेम्परेरी पीरियड यू आर लॉक्ड अप इन लोकल थाना जो भी होगा, एंड देन यू आर सेंट टू प्रॉपर जो प्रिजन होता है. सो इवन ड्यूरिंग मौर्यन एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन दिस डिफरेंस वॉज वेरी क्लियर. आप लिख सकते हो एक लास्ट पॉइंट यहां पे. द जेल बंधनगढ़, the jail Bandhangarh was different from the police lockup called Chark. From the police lockup called Chark. So Chark will be what modern police lockups in Thana जो होता है, and Bandhangarh will be what जो तिहाड़ जेल है. It was a royal symbol. Mauryas का royal symbol है. So in fact in the very first class I told you, last class I told you that the term Maurya, where exactly does it come from? And there are many theories, right? So one of the theories that जो clan है, जो Mauryan clan है, they were peacock, वहां पे peacocks बहुत सारे थे, right? So they were peacock tamers and peacock became their royal symbol because of that. Last but a very important is Mitra. Now Mitra basically is interstate relationship, that what type of relationship a king needs to maintain with his neighbors, with other states, right? So as part of interstate relationship, Arthashastra talks about 6 different policies collectively known as Shadgunya. Shadgunya talks about, it depends upon how powerful your enemy is. Let's say for example, if your enemy is weaker than you, then you have to maintain what we call policy of Vigraha. Vigraha basically means hostility, that you have to continuously maintain hostility. If your enemy is stronger than you, then you have to maintain a policy of Sandhi. You have to maintain कि आप friendship बनाओ. If your enemy is almost equal to you, then आप शांत रहना है आपको. You have to maintain की policy of not doing anything. If your enemy is very weak than you, then go and attack the enemy, annex the kingdom. If your enemy is very strong than you, then you need to ensure that if you are attacked, you are either taking shelter in the fort, in the capital, or in one of the neighboring regions. And last tech policy that is also very, very important, which is called dual policy, that if you are attacked by one neighbor, then you take help from another neighbor, take help from another. So Vigraha from one and Sandhi from another. So a dual policy, that is also part of Arthashastra. Apart from that, it talks about 3 types of conquerors. I told you that entire Arthashastra is written from the point of view of Vijigishu, a conqueror who will become. So 3 types of conquerors are mentioned: Dharma Vijayan, Lobh Vijayan, and जो पूरा demonic victory का concept है. So just write down few things. Kautilya discusses interstate policy. No. Forced labor, why it will be maintained? It is not an example of maintaining justice. So forced labor has nothing to do with justice per se. So if I am saying justice, then I am saying that something wrong has occurred, and then people have been given punishment. But if I am using the word, so for example, there is a very good chance that people who are in jail, even today, many prisoners are given some manual work कि आपको जेल में काम करते रहना है. That is a different thing compared to what Visthi is. Visthi is forced labor. For example, let's say आपने unoccupied land को agricultural land बनाना है. A king can ask people to do that without paying anything. That is what Visthi is. So Visthi as a forced labor has nothing to do with the concept of justice. It has to do with the fact that state can collect taxes from you, and one of the form of that tax will be that you are doing work but you are not paying any tax, you are doing work for free. Okay, write down. Kautilya discusses interstate policy. Kautilya discusses interstate policy. Kautilya discusses interstate policy and takes account of all possible circumstances. Takes account of all possible circumstances. He takes account of all possible circumstances. He lists 6 policies collectively called Shadgunya. He lists 6 policies collectively called Shadgunya. Shadgunya. Which are as follows. Which are as follows. First is policy of Sandhi. Policy of Sandhi. Sandhi basically means peace treaty. Policy of Sandhi. Write down. If one is weaker than the enemy. If one is weaker than the enemy. Policy of Vigraha. Vigraha basically means hostility. Policy of Vigraha. If one is stronger than enemy. If one is stronger than enemy. Policy of Asana. Policy of Asana, which basically means keeping quiet. Keeping quiet. If one's power is equal to that of the enemy. If one's power is equal to that of enemy. Equal to that of enemy. So policy of Asana can become policy of Vigraha or Sandhi depending upon circumstances. If one is equal, as long as equal, almost equal, policy of Asana, but let's say because of circumstances, because of internal rebellion, one becomes weaker, then it can become policy of Vigraha. So ऐसा नहीं कि fixed policies हैं. It actually depends upon circumstances. If circumstances are changing, you have to change the policy also. Policy of Yarn. Policy of Yarn. Yarn basically means marching on military expedition. Military expedition. Policy of Yarn. If one is much stronger than the enemy. If one is much stronger than the enemy. Policy of Samshray. Policy of Samshray. If one is much weaker than the enemy. So Samshray basically means seeking shelter. Seeking shelter. And last is policy of, double policy of, this is called double policy, Dvaidhi Bhav. Dvaidhi Bhav. Now Dvaidhi Bhav basically means that you have to maintain Sandhi with one and Vigraha with another. So Dvaidhi Bhav literally means dual policy, Sandhi with one and Vigraha with another. Sandhi with one and Vigraha with another. Arthashastra mentions three types of conquerors. Write down in next bullet point. Arthashastra mentions three types of conquerors. Three types of conquerors. Asura Vijayan, Asura Vijayan, demonic victory, Asura Vijayan, demonic victory, Lobh Vijayan, Lobh Vijayan, inspired by greed, and Dharma Vijayan, Dharma Vijayan, inspired by glory. So the difference is very simple. Policy of Samshraya basically means seeking shelter. If you have been attacked by an enemy which is very powerful, then you have to seek shelter either in your fort, fortified capital, or you have to take shelter in one of your allies. So Samshraya simply means that you have to seek shelter if you are attacked by an enemy who is very, very powerful. I have already explained Asura Vijayan basically means that after conquering, you kill the conquered king as well as seize all the land. In Lobh Vijayan, you do not kill the king, but you take away everything, right? And in Dharma Vijayan, you just have assert your authority. The focus is not capturing land or taking away life, but asserting your authority, increasing your territorial extent, so which is called Dharma Vijayan. And Arthashastra clearly mentions that Dharma Vijayan is the best form of victory. And at the same time, I told you in the last class also, this Dharma Vijayan is different from Dhamma Ghosh of Ashoka. Ashoka in his Dhamma Ghosh is not talking about military expedition at all. It is not about warfare. It is about spreading his ideas of Dhamma. And if more and more kings accept those ideas, Ashoka declared himself to be victorious, not in terms of Bheri Ghosh, but as in terms of Dhamma Ghosh. So Dhamma Ghosh and Dharma Vijayan are two different things. Even though the root word in both the cases Dharma. So Dhamma basically is Pali of Dharma. So the root word is same, but the difference is very, very clear. Give the next heading. Social aspects, some social aspects during Mauryas. Some social aspects during Mauryas. Some social aspects during Mauryas. The reason I have mentioned here some, rather than not talking about social aspects in detail, is very clear because regarding society we have very less information. What type of society we are talking about? Whatever information we have from Arthashastra. And Arthashastra is a book of space of a statecraft, right? So that is why हम बहुत डिटेल में नहीं बात कर सकते. For example, what exactly is the status of women in the society? all those things, it is very difficult to answer a lot of questions. But there are few things which can be answered. For example, Arthashastra is very much conscious about untouchability, and it in fact further strengthens the idea of untouchability. जैसे a social group which are called Chandals. Now Chandals जो है, there has been a lot of debate that who exactly are Chandals. In certain texts, Chandals have been called outside Varna system. तो ये जो fourfold Varna system है, a group of people who are involved into activities such as trading of meat, taking away skin of animal, or dealing with dead bodies. All of these professions collectively are known as Chandal. So in terms of profession, it is very clear. In terms of, this is also very clear that Chandal के जो बच्चे होंगे फिर they are also going to become Chandal. They do not have any opportunity to increase their social mobility, right? But who exactly became Chandals, that is a very difficult question to answer. There are many theories behind it. For example, one of the theories that in certain cases punishments were given. For example, a person who has done some heinous crime, he was outcasted from the society and he became a Chandal. In another instance, it is mentioned that if a Brahman woman marries a Shudra man, then the children will become Chandal. In general, जिसको हम प्रतिलोम marriage बोलते हैं, that woman of higher class and man of lower class. So they will become Chandal. So who exactly are Chandal? Sometimes they are called Panch Varna, that is their fifth Varna. Sometimes they are called outside Varna system. But one thing is very clear, that even though position of Shudras improved, especially during Gupta period, but position of Chandal, that further declined. And Chandals were forced to live in the outskirts of city. They could not enter into mainland of city. In fact, whenever they entered, they had to take a stick and they had to basically keep hitting the stick on ground so that they will announce their arrival, because even looking at Chandal was called a misfortune. So people can look to the other way. Now that was the division in the society. By the way, this division became much more stronger during Gupta period, but even during Mauryan period, in Arthashastra, Chandals are mentioned, and it is mentioned that उनके लिए जो well होगा, जो living conditions होंगे, everything will be different compared to other varnas or other sections of the society. Arthashastra also talks about slaves in detail. And this is very interesting because Megasthenes mentions that slavery does not exist in India, right? But Arthashastra mentions terms like dasa and dasi. The reason we have to assume here that why Megasthenes mentioned that slavery does not exist in India is because slavery, how it was practiced in Greek, and slavery, how it was practiced in India, it was very different. In Greek kingdom, slave trade was a very, very important part. You were buying and selling slaves. There were markets dedicated to slaves. Something like this did not exist in ancient India. In ancient India, the slave market or slave trade ka concept, that did not exist, right? But so maybe Megasthenes was trying to compare the Indian situation with what it was in Greek kingdoms. But at the same time, the term dasas and dasis hai, because these are people who have been forced to do free of the work, they are what modern definition of slave is. That if you are doing something as free of work. So Arthashastra has a dedicated chapter regarding slavery tradition, जो इस बार UPSC ने पूछा भी था in fact. But Arthashastra is very sympathetic towards slavery. Same is also true for Ashoka. For example, in one of the inscriptions, Ashoka mentions that taking care of slave is a special duty of king. We talked about this in the last class. So even in Arthashastra, for example, a lot of things are mentioned. That yes, slavery can be a punishment. There can be a judicial punishment that person becomes a slave. But at the same time, even slaves have certain rights. So for example, especially a slave woman has certain rights. She has her own sexual rights. If, for example, if a slave woman becomes pregnant, then jo son born hoga, he will not be a slave. In fact, both mother and son, they will be freed of slavery. So all of these things are mentioned. In fact, it is also mentioned that, especially regarding slave woman, that if a master does anything which harms a slave woman, then jo punishment honge, they will be very severe. So it's not that just because slaves, it does not mean that they have no rights. So Arthashastra talks about slavery tradition. And by the way, this was asked by UPSC this year. So there are three statements. Ek statement ye tha that a person can become a slave as part of judicial punishment. That is true. One of the option was that if a woman borns a son, then both woman and son, they are going to be freed of slavery. That is also true. So all the three statements regarding slavery, that is true. So just write down few things here. Megasthenes divided Indian people into 7 strata. Megasthenes divided Indian people into 7 strata. Philosophers, farmers, herdsmen, philosophers, farmers, herdsmen, comma, artisans, soldiers, overseers, and king's counselors. One thing is very clear, that this was his own invention, right? He also mentions that no one in India could marry outside their genos. What exactly genos mean is a very difficult, this is a Greek word, but it may have meant a clan based lineage, that marriage will only be in one clan. आप लिख सकते हो bracket में, this is a Greek word to refer a clan. Megasthenes lauds Indian society for not having slaves. Write down. Megasthenes lauds Indian society for not having any slaves. Megasthenes lauds, praises basically. Lauds basically means praises. Megasthenes lauds Indian society to not have any slaves, for not having any slaves. However, Arthashastra has a detailed discussion, discussions regarding dasas, dasi, and ahitak, ब्रैकेट में लिख लेना अहितक के, those who pledged to creditors when contracting a debt. Those who were pledged to creditors when contracting a debt. Pledged to creditors when contracting a debt. It simply means that बहुत बार होता है ना, बैंक से जब लोन लेते हो, you have to pledge your piece of land. Even people were pledged that if I am not able to pay, then this person will become slave. Right? For example, often it will be done by, let's say, that if I'm not able to repay, then our son or daughter is going to work in your household for free. राइट. तो ये जो बॉन्डेड लेबर का जो पूरा कॉन्सेप्ट है, सो बॉन्डेड लेबर इज अ टाइप ऑफ स्लेवरी इन फैक्ट. इफ यू, एंड दिस वाज अ वेरी पॉपुलर प्रैक्टिस इवन इन मॉडर्न इंडियन, इवन इन मॉडर्न व्हेन ब्रिटिशर्स वेर इन इंडिया, दैट किसी ने थोड़ा सा कर्ज लिया, जो सूद होगा, जो ब्याज होगा वो इतना ज़्यादा होगा, इंटरेस्ट इतना ज़्यादा होगा, दैट यू हैव नो वे ऑफ रिपेइंग दैट, एंड in the course of time you become bonded labor. So bonded labor is a type of slavery. So bonded labor in this case is what we called ahitak in Mauryan administration during Mauryan period. Write down next bullet point. Kautilya lists rules for the treatment of, Kautilya lists rules for the treatment of male and female slaves, rules for the treatment of male and female slaves, and penalties for their penalties for their transgression, penalties for their transgression, penalties for their transgression. It simply means that there are, even if they are slaves, there are certain rules you need to follow. If you're not following those rules, you can be punished. So transgression basically means that if you're not following certain rules and certain protocols. Write down the next bullet point. So slavery, if you are freed of slavery, there is a word for it which is called manumission. So I'm going to use this word. If you are freed of slavery, you are a slave, but you are freed of slavery, then it is called manumission. तो आप लिख सकते हो, there is a reference of manumission of slaves on payment of a sum of money, on payment of a sum of money, if a dasi had a son with her master, she was released from enslavement, and child was considered father's legitimate son. She was released from enslavement and child was considered father's legitimate son. Write down next bullet point. The position of Chandals declined. The position of Chandals declined. Chandals and Shwapakas, Shwapakas were dog breeders. Chandals and Shwapakas were called Antavasayin. That is people who live on the margin of settlements. That is people who live on the margin of settlements. People who live on the margin of settlements. Give the last heading of Mauryas, decline of Mauryas. Decline of Mauryas. देखो इसको लेके काफ़ी थ्योरीज हैं, that why Mauryan Empire declined. I told you that centralized administration, and as centralization becomes weaker, the empire will decline. This was the most accepted theory. But we do not have enough information to actually assert that if this theory is correct or not. So if, for example, if theory is, if it was not a centralized empire, then is theory का कुछ meaning नहीं रह गया. So what type of control was there? It will be a very difficult question to answer. There are many historians have different opinions, and all of those opinions are on selected reading of Indica or Arthashastra or other text. So it will be very difficult to come to a certain conclusion. What we can assume is that in the course of time, the kings were not very competent enough. In the course of time, their rule, especially in the peripheral areas, their control in the peripheral areas, that declined. Maybe treasury got depleted because of perhaps less land revenue, because of corruption in the administration. तो बहुत general points जो हम लिखते हैं. All we can say that in general जो points होते हैं कि why a kingdom declines or why an empire declines. So there are some general points which can be mentioned. That control over people declined, especially जो peripheral areas हैं. आपका जो treasury है that got depleted. Maybe there were certain invasions, certain internal rebellions. Internal rebellions तो बहुत clear है, because the last ruler of Maurya was Brihadrath, who was killed by his commander Pushyamitra Shunga, and a new dynasty ruled Magad, which is Shunga dynasty. But Shunga dynasty was not controlling entire India. What was done by Chandragupta Maurya or by Ashoka? Shunga dynasty का जो पूरा rule है, that was limited to northern part, Patliputra as the capital, region of Bengal, region of Uttar Pradesh, some part of Rajasthan maybe, but not beyond that. So the Shunga empire was limited to northern part of the territory, and this point of time many new regional kingdoms emerged. One of those regional kingdoms emerged in Deccan region. So we are going to discuss now what is happening in southern part. So Satvahana kingdom is a very, very important kingdom which emerged in the Deccan region. But even before that, we will also talk about that 4 set of invasion occurred from northwest frontier. That is where invasions will occur. अगर आप invasion देखोगे इंडिया में जो भी invasions हुए हैं, they have occurred from the northwest frontier. So 4 set of invasion occurred. Greeks who already had settled, right? But in the course of time, they became again very powerful. They recaptured all the territory which was lost to Chandragupta Maurya, and then they started attacking capital. For example, at one point of time, one of the Greek army attacked Patliputra by a ruler called Menander, and he fought with the army of Shunga kings, right? But Shungs were able to defeat Greek army and they were able to maintain their position. But the Greek invasion continued. Similarly, another group of people who are called Shakas, they came again from northwest frontier. Another group of people called Parthian, they came. And the last group of people who came in ancient period, around, I'm talking about now in the next class जब हम discuss करेंगे, I'm going to talk about from about 2nd century BC to about 2nd century AD. So a period of 400 years we are going to discuss with 4 set of invasions, Greek, Shakas, Parthians and Kushans. Then after that we will talk about Satvahana kingdom which emerged in the Deccan region. And with the decline of Satvahana kingdom, then we are going to further south, 3 kingdoms which existed in southern territory of India, Cholas, Cheras and Pandyas. By the way, these are contemporary of Mauryas, and later they ruled in fact the region of Tamil Nadu and Kerala as well as part of Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh as late as 3rd century AD. So we are going to discuss a period of 600 years which is collectively known as Sangam age in the region of Tamil Nadu and Kerala, right? So that we will discuss in the next to next class. And जो last हमारा major topic of ancient history होगा, that will be Guptas. So Guptas will be the last major topic. But इसका मतलब ये नहीं कि class will be over. उसके बाद we are mainly going to focus upon the political development, because after Guptas you do not have any centralized authority which ruled for a very long duration. Whenever a kingdom emerged which was ruling a larger territory, it was not able to maintain its position for a very long duration. So Gupta period जब हम complete कर लेंगे, that will be over 80% of our ancient India will be over. Just जो smaller part जो political development है, that we are going to discuss in 1 or 1.5 classes, that what happened after Gupta period. But अभी just एक last point लिख लो आज के class का. The Mauryan Empire began to decline. The Mauryan Empire began to decline after death of Ashoka, around 232 BC, around 232 BC, the last Mauryan king Brihadrath, the last Mauryan king Brihadrath was killed by his general Pushyamitra Shunga, was killed by his general Pushyamitra Shunga, right on. Exact reasons for the decline will be difficult to pinpoint. We have to rely on general reasons. All umpires, write down, all umpires rely on mechanisms of integration and control. All umpires rely on mechanisms of integration and control over territory, resources, and people. Over territories, resources, and people. This control requires military force. Administrative structure, and ideology. Okay, so I think this should be self-explanatory. You need control over territory, you need control over resources, control over people. To do that, you require military, you require proper administration, and you require ideology. I want to know what do I mean by ideology? यहाँ पे ideology का क्या significance है? Sorry? How to govern, that is part of administration. जो govern तो वो हम अलग से लिख रहे हैं. Here ideology basically signifies what type of, in fact religion is a very very important aspect here. That what type of ideas you are spreading, what type of ideas you are patronizing. So for example, many kings often used religion as a great tool. चाहे वो Buddhism हो, चाहे कोई भी religion हो. They used Hinduism ho or Jainism ho, any type of religion, and patronizing religion is a very important aspect. So ideology basically here will signify that जो भी religious and cultural aspects हैं, focusing upon them to assert your authority in the administration. That religion, in the very first class I told you that religion was used as a tool for all the rulers across space and time to assert their authority, right? एक last line लिख लेना. Given the vast empire, in the course of time, control over all three must have strained control over all three means territory, resources and people. Control over all three must have strained and distant provinces broke away from the center. Distant provinces broke away from the center. Distant provinces broke away from the center. Mauryan Empire ended in 187 BC. So जो बृहद्रथ है, he was killed in 187 BC. Mauryan Empire ended in 187 BC. So जो Mauryan Empire का time period है, you should know, Chandragupta Maurya may have become either in 324 or 321 BC. The empire continued till 187 BC. ठीक है? In next class we will briefly talk about Shungs and Kanva, but जो हमारा major topic होगा that will be 4 invasions as well as Satvahana kingdom.